Great. Well, thank you all for joining. I know that there are a few more that will be joining in the next few minutes, but just to be mindful of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's session on immigration and global migration. And before we get started, I want to thank the World Affairs Council of Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky for putting together such a wonderful international education summit and for including the Cleveland Council. And we're very excited to have each of you here with us this afternoon as we explore this pertinent topic. Now, over the next hour, I'm going to be sharing educational resources that would be helpful in discussing this challenging topic with your students. If you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to submit these through the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and I will be leaving time to answer any questions at the end of the session. I'm also going to be emailing a letter of attendance after the session for continuing education credits, and the presentation will also be emailed for your review. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, I do want to say a few words about the Cleveland Council. The Cleveland Council on World Affairs is a nonprofit in Cleveland, Ohio, and our mission is to inspire engagement in international affairs and world cultures through education, citizen diplomacy, and public dialogue. So in that same vein, I hope that today's session inspires you all to address issues of migration with your students. So we have two objectives for this afternoon session. The first is to learn about resources and activities that would be helpful in teaching and discussing immigration and global migration, including the current crisis at the border. And the second is to foster ideas to use the resources provided to discuss these topics in your classroom. So why teach immigration and global migration? Immigration is a complex and controversial issue that can evoke very strong emotions. And for those of you that are already addressing this in your classroom, I'm sure you've seen that in your students. Exploring this topic in the classroom encourages students to grapple with a difficult issue in a thoughtful and productive way. Immigration is also an important policy issue at the federal level that directly affects people in our own communities, whether that's Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky or Cleveland, Ohio. Encouraging students to connect issues in their community with these policies and to take action helps them become more engaged citizens. Integrating the stories and facts of immigrant experiences into the classroom also creates a more welcoming environment for immigrant families and students because they see that their knowledge and experiences are valued. And then immigration is also a great way to educate students on the topic of human rights, both nationally and globally, as it touches on human rights violations happening in other countries that drive people to the US, as well as addresses human rights violations in people in the US experience as a result of the immigration system. And finally, it's a wonderful topic to explore through multiple different lenses, from social studies to art to English language arts and even math. So studying a single topic or issue through these many different lenses can help better reach students with different learning styles or interest areas. So these are just a few of the many reasons to discuss issues of immigration in the classroom. Now, schools often expect teachers like yourselves to engage students in current events, but they don't always provide the tools or strategies necessary to do so. And I recognize for many teachers, preparing lessons and leading conversations around these charged and challenging topics, such as family separation or the current US immigration policy, it can be really overwhelming and intimidating. So it's important to provide this safe and supportive space in your classroom for students to process these topics. And the danger in not providing students with this space to discuss these issues is that students are then at a greater risk of being isolated, and they're also potentially exposed to information that might be wrong or might reinforce a particular narrative. Now, I do want to reiterate that, at least in my experience, teachers are not necessarily expected to know all of the answers when they're tackling these controversial issues within the classroom. And it's perfectly valid for the discussions around immigration and global migration to raise more questions than answers. There really is value in providing students with the opportunities to think critically and dig deeper into exploring values and attitudes toward these challenging topics with consideration and respect for others. So I like to think of the teacher as the impartial chairperson, in that a teacher ensures that all viewpoints are represented through either student statements or published reputable sources, but that the teacher doesn't necessarily inject or state their own opinion on these challenging topics. So today, we're going to walk through exercises, lesson plans, and resources that might be helpful in tackling these issues in a factual, nonpartisan manner. Now, the first resource that I would encourage you to explore with your students is US Citizenship and Immigration Services. And this would help students take a deeper look at immigration policy currently in the United States. This is a US government website that offers statistics and information about current government policy regarding immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. Another great resource that you might have students explore is the Pew Research Center, which is a nonpartisan non-advocacy fact tank that has been studying immigration for more than a decade. And their website provides links to articles, statistics, and public opinion polls on the topic of immigration. And you'll see here that they also offer a mini course on US immigration past and present, which consists of 5 short email lessons that are delivered every other day. And these lessons include readings on various topics regarding immigration that link to Pew Research Center studies and reports. So this might work well as an introductory lesson or as a homework assignment for students. Another great resource is the UN Refugee Agency, or the UNHCR. And this agency's role is to protect refugees, forcibly displaced communities, and stateless people, and to assist in their voluntary repatriation, local integration, or resettlement to a country. So if you work with Model UN students, you might already address this agency with them. But for those of us that don't necessarily integrate the UN into our curriculum, it might be a helpful resource. Their website includes reports, statistics, photos, and videos all about the UNHCR and the refugee experience. Another great resource is the US Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. And this committee works to advance the rights and lives of those who have been forcibly or voluntarily uprooted. And they help people get back on their feet to establish new roots by connecting them to the essentials like jobs, education, and healthcare. Now, when thinking about migration, you might also explore a website called World Population History, which tracks the movement of peoples over time. So what you'll see here is a tool, and it is essentially a historical timeline that gives context to the changes on the map through milestones that have impacted population growth over the years. So you'll see here all of these little population dots, each of which is annotated with events and information about what was going on at that particular location during that particular time. And these population dots might address changes or movements in peoples and societies. It might address developments in science and technology or food and agriculture. It also addresses developments in health, as well as the health of a population and changes in the environment. This website also includes readings, other interactive tools like the one you see here, and lesson plans. And as a follow-on activity to possibly having students explore this world population history timeline, you could also ask students to collect current news articles that relate either directly or indirectly to population trends. So those might include stories about migrants or refugees. And you could encourage students to consider articles for a wide variety of themes that might be reflective of or adjacent to immigration and global migration. So they might look at themes of environmental changes, economic changes, or social and political turmoil that might address some of those push and pull factors that address global migration trends. Now, another helpful resource is iCivics. And this was founded in 2008 by retired Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. This website provides educational online games and lesson plans to promote civics education. And I will note that this website tends to be more appropriate for middle school students, but it might be fun for high school students to play around with as well. And here are just two examples of games that are offered. So the first is Immigration Nation, in which students would guide newcomers through the path to citizenship. And the second is Do I Have a Right, in which students run their own firm of lawyers specializing in constitutional law. iCivics offers over 20 games, each of which is designed to be played in under 45 minutes. And I'll also note that all of the games are available in Spanish as well. Another wonderful resource to explore immigration with students is the Pulitzer Center, which some of you might be familiar with. So the Pulitzer Center raises awareness of underreported global issues through direct support for journalism across all media platforms and through education programs as well as public outreach. They provide grant funding to support 150 journalist projects each year. And again, each of these are about underreported stories on issues ranging from migration and human rights to climate change and global health. And these are just a few of the places that stories funded by the Pulitzer Center have been published, some of which might be familiar to you and your students, others may be new to you. And here's just a deeper look at some of the topics that journalists investigate with the Pulitzer Center grants. So the center supports teachers in many ways, including providing lesson plans associated with the topics that you see here. They also host a number of student contests throughout the year, and they offer virtual journalist visits, all to achieve their mission of cultivating a more curious, informed, empathetic, and engaged public by connecting students and teachers with underreported global news stories, as well as the journalists who cover them. So as I shared, the Pulitzer Center offers virtual journalist visits for students in grades 5 through 12. And here are just a few of the many journalists available to speak with students, obviously on a wide range of topics, as you can see here, including migration. Now, this might be especially useful in an online or blended learning environment, as you would be able to set up a Zoom call with one or more of these potential speakers. To begin thinking about migration, you could also engage students in a push-pull factors exercise. So obviously, push factors are the conditions that push people to leave their homes and to move somewhere new. So for example, someone might be pushed to migrate by poverty. The pull factors are the conditions that pull people to a new place or draw people to a new place. So for example, someone might be pulled to a new place because it has more job opportunities. Now, some migrants may experience only push factors or only pull factors, but most tend to experience a combination of the two. So you could ask students, why might some people choose to leave their homes? What are some of those push factors? Why might some people choose to live in another country? What are those pull factors? And ask students to consider some of the economic, political, environmental, and social circumstances that might influence one's decision to immigrate. So I would ask all of you to do this exercise quickly in the chat box right now. If you can think through what are some push factors for migrants and what are some of the pull factors. So I'll give you just a minute to pop those into the chat box. Absolutely, push factors being civil war, political persecution, absolutely. war, famine, natural disasters, increasingly natural disasters. I think there's a great deal of opportunity to tie discussions of migration with climate and climate change. Absolutely. Climate again, religious persecution, war, famine, and then some of those pull factors, better economic opportunities, job opportunities. Absolutely. So absolutely right. And in the classroom, this could be a quick activity that you do at the beginning of class. So you could have two posters set up in your classroom, one titled push factors, one titled pull factors. And then using Post-it notes, you could give students a few minutes to just reflect and record their answers, and then have them post their answers to the corresponding poster. It's a very simple activity that gets students thinking about the immigrant experience and what immigrants go through. Now, another organization called the Advocates for Human Rights is a great resource for curriculum that addresses some of these issues of migration. This that you see here is pulled from a resource titled Teaching Immigration with the Immigrant Stories Project. And it includes a handout of various push and pull scenarios that might be helpful in breaking down this exercise for younger students. So you'll see here 6 scenarios that I pulled from the resource packet, but they actually had 4 pages of scenarios just like this. I think there might be 50 in total. So if you wanted to look at specific scenarios and have students determine if the scenario exemplifies a push or a pull factor, it could be a fun activity for students to engage in. And here is the website link for you to explore on your own time. And all of those materials are free and available for the public. Now, I know a few of you are familiar with the Choices program, but for those of you that might be unfamiliar, another wonderful resource is the Choices program, which is developed by Brown University's Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. To become engaged with current events like immigration and global migration, students need resources to help them better understand and unpack those issues and where we're at today. So this includes looking at the historical context that led to our present day challenges, unpacking current policy discussions, as well as looking at resources to help determine one's own informed opinion about a particular issue. So the Choices program seeks to empower students to think critically about the past and how it shapes the present. They show students how to apply historical knowledge and critical thinking skills to gain an understanding of current issues. And they aid students in becoming more discerning consumers of information and more engaged global citizens. Now, the Choices program currently has over 35 curriculum units looking at both current issues and historical turning points. All of their units are aligned to Common Core, C3, and state standards. And I will note that the Choices units are designed for 9th through 12th grades, but they are adaptable for 5th through 8th grades as well. Now I'm just going to take a look at a recent Choices lesson, which is free and can be found online. And it dives into US immigration policy, past and present. Now, facilitating discussions about immigration is always easier with some background knowledge about the legacy of immigration in the United States, as well as looking at the current state of US immigration policy. So in this lesson, students review a timeline of US immigration policy and laws from European colonization through today. Students then identify patterns in immigration policy and the factors that led to those policies, and then synthesize their findings and present them to the class. So I'm just going to walk you through the key components of this lesson. So students will explore the timeline that you see here. So each student or each pair or group of students would be assigned a particular time period from one of these 7 options. Students would then complete a graphic organizer associated with their assigned time period. They would then share a short description of what happened in their assigned time period, and those students or those groups not presenting would fill in the relevant section of their graphic organizers. And then the students would share out with the group. And in that lesson debrief, you might ask students what some similarities are between immigration policies of the past and present. What are some differences that have evolved over time? What are some factors that led to each policy? How did other events influence the creation of immigration policy? And how did different groups or people respond to policies over time? Now, just to take a look at what one of these events on the historical timeline looks like, you'll see this is from 1917, and it looks at the 1917 Immigration Act. Most of the events on the historical timeline provide a photo as well as some context for the photo and some context as to what this immigration policy was all about. Now, if you wish to build off this lesson with your students, you could also have them consider some of the push and pull factors throughout history. You might also instruct students to pick a date from the timeline that interests them or might be reflective of what you're studying in social studies or history, and then research what else was happening in the country or the world at that time. You could have students write about the domestic and international events that they identified and how those might have contributed or led to the immigration policy that was developing at the time. Now, to look at another choices lesson, again, it is free and can be found online. This one is all about refugee stories. And in this lesson, students will explore the human geography of the refugee crisis, use data to create a map of the crisis, and examine one refugee's story and use it to map his or her experiences. So to better understand the scope of the refugee crisis, students first analyze data on refugees, and then they map the information using the key that you see here. So this is kind of the first part of this lesson plan. And after students map the crisis, you could ask them if they were surprised by any of the data or found any of the data striking. You might ask them how the data compares to what they might have expected to see or what they expected those numbers to be. Once students have gotten a look at the overall global crisis of refugees, they will then read the account of one refugee and map his or her journey. Now, there are 7 refugee stories that students would be able to choose from, but here you'll see I chose the story of Shahad, who is a refugee traveling from Syria to Lebanon. So students would fill out the graphic organizer to help map their particular refugee's journey, and then they would complete the map of their actual refugee's journey, labeling the country names of the refugee's country of origin, their host countries, as well as any countries that they might have described passing through. Now, to modify this activity, you could also complete it as a class. So you could have students collaboratively shade in the countries on a map projected on your smartboard or screen. If you want to watch a video about refugees' journeys rather than reading through a short essay, you could also check out a wonderful resource called Life on Hold, which is developed by Al Jazeera. And this website features video interviews with Syrian refugees living in Lebanon. And there are 10 refugee stories to choose from in total. Now, each refugee's page includes a video about their life, which is about 8 minutes in length, as well as a map that shows their route out of Syria. So you could have students watch the video and explore the map for a description of the refugee's journey. And that's the website that you can find this. And again, I will be sharing this presentation with you all after the session today, so you will have the links to all of these resources. Another great activity to get students thinking about a given topic is the 4 corners exercise. So I don't know if any of you have done this with your class, but I think it's really great to get students moving and thinking about a given issue. So for this activity, you would provide a statement pertaining to a given issue or current event. And you would assign the four corners of the room to the four levels of which you agree or disagree with the statement. So one corner would be fully agree, another corner would be somewhat agree, the third would be fully disagree or 100% disagree, and then the last corner would be somewhat disagree. And here are just a few examples of prompts that you might present to students on the topic of immigration. So the US must remain a symbol of hope and opportunity for the people of the world. Agree, disagree, somewhat disagree. Only after our veterans, the homeless, and underemployed citizens are taken care of should we consider taking in refugees or immigrants. The US has a moral responsibility to admit and resettle refugees as a means for addressing poverty and injustice around the world. US immigration policies should be based on a realistic assessment of US national interests, not on lofty ideals. So again, this is just an activity to get students thinking. You might do this at the beginning of a immigration or global migration unit to see where students are at the beginning of the unit, and then complete the exercise again at the end to see if students' opinions have changed with the more knowledge and fact-based resources that you've shared with them. And again, this activity could always be easily modified to address different topics or issues. Now, shifting to another resource, the Global Oneness Project. All of their resources are also free and can be found online. And their mission is to connect through stories the human experience to global issues such as climate change, water scarcity, food insecurity, poverty, and migration. And the Global Oneness Project features individuals and communities that are impacted by these issues. So this organization offers a library of resources comprised of films, photo essays, and articles, most of which also have either a companion curriculum or a companion discussion guide. Again, all of the content is available for free, and these resources are available in both English and Spanish, and are all aligned to the Common Core state standards. Now, within their migration library, we're just going to take a look at a paired lesson and film. So this lesson, focused on displacement and human rights, is titled A Refugee Story, and it is paired with the short film, Welcome to Canada, which runs approximately 20 minutes in length. This short film tells the story of a man named Mohammed Assalah, who is a young Syrian refugee granted asylum in Canada in 2014. After fleeing torture and imprisonment by the Assad regime, he begins rebuilding his life in Canada. And he actually consuls newly arrived Syrian refugee families with the same NGO that aided him during his own resettlement process. So this is a resource that really highlights one refugee story and allows students to continue to reflect on the refugee experience that people are experiencing today in our modern world. Now, another helpful resource, which I am sure most, if not all of you are familiar with, is Facing History and Ourselves. Facing History's resources address racism, anti-Semitism, and prejudice at pivotal moments in history, which often overlap with immigrant and refugee experiences. So as such, one of the major topics covered by Facing History is global immigration. And they offer a number of lessons, readings, and teaching strategies that might be helpful in discussing immigration and global migration. So as we've discussed today in our discussion with the push and pull factors, war, economics, persecution, and the desire for opportunity in a new place are among the reasons that are prompting hundreds of millions of people around the world to move. And students might have heard or read news stories about Central American migrant families being separated from one another at the US-Mexico border. Students might be aware of the genocide of the Rohingya people, a Muslim minority group that has been persecuted by members of Myanmar's Buddhist majority and forced to flee to overcrowded refugee camps in neighboring Bangladesh. Students might also know about the men, women, and children fleeing drought and famine in Somalia, the political and economic chaos in Venezuela, the civil war in Syria, or the extreme violence of Boko Haram in Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger. So regardless of which of these stories students may have heard or may have known about, they may not fully understand them as a part of a worldwide pattern, as a part of a global crisis. So using images from Facing History's Global Migration Image Gallery, you might create a global migration photography exhibit to help students better understand truly the scope and complexity of global migration today. And if I were to do this, I would ask students to complete a See, Think, Wonder reflection, which is just another strategy to get students thinking about these controversial, challenging topics. So you could ask students, what do you see in the photos posted around the room? You could ask them to make a list of details that might stand out to them. Then you would ask students to think about what is happening in the image. What would make them think that that is happening? And finally, what does the image make students wonder? Now, depending on your class size, you might post a number of different copies of each of these images around the classroom. And I'll also note that each of the images within this photo gallery also has a descriptive caption that describes where this photo was taken place and provides some context as to what was happening when this photo was taken place. So you can either post that with the image or post it on the back of the image so that students could examine the image without relying on titles or descriptions. So with that, I hope that you discovered some new resources for your classroom and have some new ideas for how to foster discussions on immigration. So if you could please complete this survey, I would greatly appreciate your feedback on this webinar for this evening so that we can continue to improve our programming. And as a reminder, the PowerPoint is going to be emailed for your review, so you can find all of the links shared. And I will also be emailing a certificate of completion for any continuing education credits.